Good evening. I'm Saisha Grayson, curator of time-based media at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to welcome you all to tonight's event honoring the prolific and powerful film work of Ana Mendieta. This is part of Viewfinder, Women's Film and Video from the Smithsonian, a year-long virtual screening and conversation series that has featured an array of moving image works by women across the Smithsonian collections and has been generously sponsored by the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. Though we gather tonight in cyberspace, tuning in from different locations, we gratefully acknowledge the Native people on whose ancestral homelands we each sit, including the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home in DC, where our physical museums are, and where I am in Lenape-Hoking, also known as New York City. For more on the Lenape, also known as the Delaware tribe, you can visit their tribal website linked in the chat. And if you want to learn more about the Native people and histories where you are, I suggest cross-referencing the digital map Native Lands and the National Congress of American Indians list of current tribal representation. Those are both also going to appear in the chat. And the same way that we're using the chat for info sharing, we hope you'll use the question and answer function, which is available throughout the program. Please feel free to submit questions as you think of them, and the moderators will draw those into the conversation with our distinguished guest, Raquel Cecilia Mendieta, in the later portion of the program. We also recommend selecting the gallery, active speaker, or thumbnail view in the top right corner of your Zoom screen, and that will give you a way to see our panelists in the presentation at the same time. Throughout, we have live closed caption available, which can be accessed along the bottom menu. With the logistics out of the way, it is now my pleasure and privilege to introduce this very special and final edition of the Viewfinder series. Tonight, we'll be screening 4 short, silent films by the incredible Ana Mendieta, and then after that, my colleagues Charlotte Ickes and Marina Iskro will be in conversation with our niece Raquel, who is also a filmmaker and associate administrator for the estate of Ana Mendieta. This is a fitting culmination for the Viewfinder series in so many ways. In 2020, when our museums were closed to the public, the 3 dedicated media art curators across the Smithsonian, namely myself at SAM, Charlotte at National Portrait Gallery, and Marina at the Hirshhorn Museum, hatched the idea that a year-long screening program would ensure meaningful artworks and ideas could reach our audiences no matter what 2021 threw at us. And that turned out to be pretty wise. Each month in 2020, then, we've highlighted works and artists from across our own and other Smithsonian collections, and we organized the offerings thematically. So the first half of the year focused on artists grappling with interiority and private enclosed experiences. And the second half with the ways external forces shape how we move through the world. Both themes have turned out to be particularly resonant with their times, as the first months coincided with rolling lockdowns and enclosures, and then the second in this changing landscape as we figure out how to navigate new public policies and ever-changing conditions. So now for December's Viewfinder, we are excited to conclude our collaboration by co-presenting artworks from all 3 of our collections, as Ana Mendieta's films are important to portraiture, global contemporary, and American art equally. And as I reflect on the films we'll screen in a moment and Mendieta's practice overall, I can't think of an artist who more consistently insisted on the interconnection of interior and exterior experiences. Mendieta's performances have both an inward intensity and a radiating resonance. Her spiritual, psychological, emotional rituals enacted through her body are intimately, inseparably linked to environments, geographies, and the global politics from colonialism to the Cold War that profoundly shaped the world Mendieta and all of us move through and are moved by. Mendieta's life journey began in 1948 when she was born in Havana, Cuba, to a prominent and politically active family. As Fidel Castro's communist government consolidated power, it was determined that Ana and her sister Raqueline would be sent to the US as part of Operation Peter Pan. They were among 14,000 unaccompanied Cuban children who came to the US between 1960 and 62 through this joint endeavor led by the US government and Catholic Charities. Like others, they were the first in a refugee camp and then orphanages before landing in foster homes in Iowa, where Ana attended high school, college, and ultimately graduate art school, enrolling in the Distinguished Experimental Intermediate MFA program at the University of Iowa in 1972. There she began working with Super 8 film, a medium that allowed her to represent ephemeral land art interventions and performances, and it became a mainstay for her next decade of prolific production, with over 100 existent film works identified in her oeuvre. After completing her studies in 1977, she moved to New York City, where her career really took off. She began showing in group shows consistently, and in 1978, she joined the leadership of a groundbreaking women's art collective, AIR Gallery, and there she had a solo show in 1979 of her renowned Silhouette series. She also co-curated for AIR Gallery a landmark intersectional feminist exhibition, Dialectics of Isolation, an exhibition of third world artists in the United States in 1981. And in 1983, she was awarded the Rome Prize by the American Academy in Rome. In the years just before her untimely death in 1985, she had solo shows in Rome, Havana, New York, and Newark. Posthumously, her work has been seen across the globe in almost 600 group and solo exhibitions. It's held in over 100 public collections worldwide and continues to inspire catalogs and publications that reflect on her remarkable achievements. Recently, the estate, in collaboration with Gallery Lalonde, cataloged, restored, and digitized the entirety of Mendieta's moving image works, which were then featured in a major touring exhibition, Covered in Time, The Films of Ana Mendieta. And that was on view from Minnesota to Paris from 2014 through 2018. Our honored guest, Raquel Cecilia Mendieta, was a leading force in that effort. Bringing her expertise as a filmmaker to this major undertaking, Raquel oversaw the restoration and digitization and helped bring a new understanding of the scope and centrality of Ana's film production into the public eye. In addition to this archival project and her own writing and video art, Raquel is well known for her filmic reflections on Ana's life and career, which have screened at film festivals and art museums worldwide. She is now at work on a feature-length documentary on her aunt, and I'm sure the conversation that follows will be enlightening as she brings this close, long, and intimate engagement with Ana and her work and legacy to this dialogue. So without further ado, the silent films will play in chronological order for about 14 and a half minutes, and then Charlotte and Marina and Raquel will convene on screen for their discussion and your questions. So thank you again for joining, and please enjoy.
Hello, can everyone hear me? I hope. Wow, those are so beautiful. I just want to welcome my dear colleague, Marina Isgrove from the Hirshhorn. And of course, we are both so thrilled and honored to be in conversation tonight with Raquel Cecilia Mendieta. And I can't wait to learn more about these works and also the restoration process from Raquel. So we've got lots of folks joining us tonight from all over. So I think we should just dive in and take in what we just saw. All four films were made between 73 and 75, and they were all shot in Iowa. And so I'd love to hear from you, Raquel, about Ana's relationship to that landscape, both in those four films and kind of more generally in the cultural milieu in Iowa at the time.
Okay, hi. So a lot of her early films obviously were done in Iowa because she was studying at the university there, at the University of Iowa. And because her work was very time-based, the camera, like recording with the Super 8 camera, was a way to show the work. Because of course, you know, if something happens in a room and there's nothing, you know, to show people afterwards, then did it exist or not, right? There's always that question. So especially when it comes to art, we're always thinking about, how do I share this with an audience? And she wasn't really particularly fond of just doing it for the sake of like the moment of doing it. She really liked the idea of coming back to it again and again so that people could have different experiences from it, of like watching it several times. And like for me, even, I've seen these so many times and things come up, you know, again, like like even now watching it, I'm thinking different questions like, oh, I wonder if she made that heart, or if she found a rock that looked like a heart. Like, I never thought of that before. I should find out, you know? So it's, and I've seen them so many times, and I'm always thinking of new questions to ask or new little challenges to give myself. So for Anna, I mean, let's see, so her early works really, she did do some she did chicken movie in a studio. And then when she started doing things in nature, like Corazón de Rojo con Sangre, which is outside at Old Man's Creek, she did a lot of pieces there. What she really started to do was to find places that she connected to and to return there again and again to do works. It's almost like the place became sacred to her. You know, it's like it had like special meaning to her. And so like that location, Old Man's Creek, she did several pieces there. Many of them are shot on Super 8 and are on film. The Mirage pieces nearby in the field. What other one? The Blood and Feathers. Yeah, Blood and Feathers was at Old Man's Creek. Probably really close to where Corazón de Rojo con Sangre was done. And then Sweating Blood was done in a studio. So, but I mean, Iowa for her was, I mean, it's where she lived. It's where she came of age. It's, you know, where she was sent from Cuba. So it's really the only place she knew until she started traveling later, when she went to Mexico and started traveling. So she had a very close relationship with Iowa. I mean, she loved Iowa. She did, and she returned there every year. Even after she moved to New York City, she still would return to Iowa to do works there in the summer.
Thanks, Raquel.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a more general question for you about biography and Anna's work. So the traditional approach to sort of looking at her films and her photographs is to read them almost entirely through the circumstances of her life. And I'm just curious what you think about that approach. To what extent do you think we need to read her work primarily through biography, or to what extent are those two things separable for you?
I mean, that's a good question, because you can answer it like on the opposite sides, you know, because on one hand, I feel like her work is really universal, and you don't need to know the biography to understand the work, because it just connects to so many different types of people. But then it also does have to do with her biography, because I mean, her themes are all about what happened to her, about being ripped away from her homeland. And she writes about it, you know, a lot, and talks about it a lot. And she was exploring those themes in her work. I mean, amongst other themes, that wasn't the only thing. I mean, that was just kind of like the impetus for a lot of like the Silhouette series of making her mark in the land. But then it goes deeper than that, really, to go into a human making a connection, you know, with the universe. Like, where do I fit in? You know, how do I belong here? What happens to me when I go? It has bigger questions. It's like, it starts with like a small question of like, who am I? Where did I come from? What am I doing here in Iowa? You know, then it kind of grows bigger, and you can really see that theme progress in her work as she, you know, as her work matures. It's like, because it's like, first it's like the body, specifically her body, and then when she takes her body out, and it becomes a more universal figure, and as the work progresses, it becomes more like, it's still womanly, but it's still just like human, you know, as it becomes more abstracted. So it's kind of like her approach to it was like first personal, and then it kind of opened up as it went on. So I mean, I think you can look at it in both ways. I mean, I always think it's interesting when people see the work for the first time and they don't know anything about her. Right. I love hearing like what they say, and then as they discover her life and what they're like, oh, you know, because it just creates like different meanings to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So because you're a filmmaker and we're two media curators, and you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but you know, Anna's photography is so well known, and her films are less so, although you're working to change that and are changing that. And we're so lucky to have these works in Smithsonian collections. So what do you think film did that photography couldn't for her? Because they're not just documentations of performances, they are artworks in and of themselves. And perhaps maybe you can, you know, we can kind of nerd out and talk about what Super 8 did, right? It's very specific format. And that kind of, this is a multi-part question, but I actually find that silence so powerful. And that's, of course, tied to the media too. So a multi-part question of what film could do as an artwork for her practice. And then this very specific medium of Super 8.
So with Super 8, I mean, Super 8 was what was available, probably. I mean, in that time, the late 70s, it was very inexpensive. I mean, it's crazy now. Super 8 is there's like a fad of, I mean, I shoot Super 8, it's fun, and it's really expensive. Back then it was like a couple dollars to process it. Now it's like $100, So it was something like the cameras are really small and you could just put it in your purse, I mean, it was basically made for home use. It was made for families to be able to make home movies. But artists at that time were using it to record performative works. So for her, I think why she really loved it is because her work is really process-based. She really, all her work is really about something happening. I mean, the later work, especially when it gets to sculpture, it changes, even though there's still some of that in there. Like when you look at her tree trunks, you can still see the gunpowder, and there was a process to get that burning, that we just didn't get to see it, but all her work really is based around that idea of process, and it's very thematic with her because again, it has to do with life, death, rebirth, like regeneration, so all the work kind of explores that, and what better way to show that than through something that's moving, because it's like in a photograph, it's you really are seeing a frozen moment in time. You're not getting to see that process unless you're seeing multiple photographs, and I think that's why she really was drawn to it, because of that, like being able to see to see the action happening versus just like seeing it it's so much more powerful.
Can you talk about that silence?
Yeah, the silence it's funny because I mean, Super 8 film obviously was mostly silent.
Right.
So when we were doing the exhibition Covered in Time and History, Howard Aransky, who was the curator, there was this one time he like took a group of people and stopped in front of Sweating Blood and said, and now we're all going to stand here silently and watch this film. And it was like the longest 3 minutes. Because you're aware of like, it's almost like meditating, it's like if someone says, stand here quietly and watch this film for 3 whole minutes, it's like, and you can just really, and plus that film is so intense because you're waiting for the blood to start dripping, and you're just looking at her beautiful face so silently, like looks like she's dreaming or sleeping, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and then suddenly there it comes and it all happens. So the silence is very powerful. I mean, if there was sound, it would probably change. I mean, there is, a couple things she did with sound, that they were video, and they do have a different feeling to them. I mean, I think she was interested in sound because she did record sound separately. Like we found a lot of sound reels and, things like that she was exploring with it, but never really married the two together other than in video.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what we were watching tonight obviously is digitized Super 8 film, which is then screened through Zoom. And we wanted to ask you a little bit about what you've been doing over the past several years, which is digitizing Anna's work. And so we wanted to ask you specifically how the process of digitizing these films and engaging with them so closely over so many years has maybe changed the way you think about her practice, first of all. And then also how you went about sort of, translating these media while still honoring Anna's intentions now that she's no longer with us. So it's kind of a 2-part question. How your understanding has changed, and then how you sort of approach the process.
Right. So in the beginning, we always knew she had these films, right? So for her first retrospective at the new museum, they had transferred several of them and screened some of them, a select few, at the new museum. And so, through the years, we kind of like went back to them and did the best, whatever the process was at that time, to be able to screen them. And it was like doing like a telecine with, VHS. It looked terrible compared to what we're seeing now. But I mean, that's what we had, So when we decided to do the actual digital restoration, we didn't realize how many films there were until we started doing it. We thought, oh, we've seen them all. We're kind of like, these are them, you know. But then I just started like, categorizing them and pulling things out, and we started transferring them. I was like, wow, like I've never seen this before, or wow, look at this, or even like because of the clarity, because of what you were able to see, because the way that we scan them, it's actually like almost better than the quality of the Super 8. We could see the detail of things that you couldn't even see before. It was just like, oh, you know, I never saw that before. So you could really see what was actually happening in the full, you know, in the full frame, which was really exciting. I just remember like when I was at the lab, I'd be like sending pictures all the time to my mom and to Mary at the gallery. I was like, oh my God, look at this one, you know. It was just like, I felt like a kid, like, you know, in a toy store, just like all this great stuff coming at us. So it was really exciting to go through that process. And I mean, we really felt like we were honoring what she would want to do, because she actually was doing that herself. We found several tapes that she had made when she first moved to New York, like in the late 70s. She was actually taking her Super 8 films and just doing different things. Like she blew some up to 16 millimeter so that she could screen 16 millimeter, like at a gallery. She took several and cut them together, and then they put them on 3/4 inch. And then from there, they were screening them. So she was doing whatever she could to get people to be able to see them, because it wasn't like people had Super 8, you know, projectors. Plus, every time you run it through, it's like, it's all scratched up and broken and whatever. So she would make dupes of things. So she would like make a dupe of something so that she would have the dupe to be able to, you know, show people on a projector or whatever. So she for her, I mean, she wasn't like geeking out on the medium like we are. She wasn't like, oh, Super 8 green and da da da. She was just like, I shot this thing on this, now I need to show it to you. So how do I get it to you? Here, put it on this, put it on that, whatever it takes, so that people can see this, you know.
Right,
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we felt confident that we were doing what she would have.
And there's something so fluid about her work in general, and this movement between media. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in talking about some of the different elements or objects that we see in the films, the 4 we see today. And there's some recurring ones. So blood, feathers, and then in Mirage, which is in the Porter Gallery's collection, a mirror and a prosthetic. And so I don't know how you want to tackle this, Raquel, but I'd love to hear about, you know, what those particular elements, props, objects, what you want to call them. I mean, it's like you have the landscape, you have her body, and then you have these different, sometimes recurring elements. How you see them working through these 4 specific films. And selfishly, I'd love to hear a lot about the prosthetic, because that work is in my collection.
Oh, okay.
So I'll let you answer it how you want to, but I think our audiences would be really interested to hear about why she chose certain objects to feature in these films.
Okay, so let's start with blood, since that was the first film we saw, Sweating Blood. The first film she actually did, it was one of her very early, I think it was like the 3rd film she made, Chicken Movie, Chicken Piece, which basically they cut off a chicken's head and she stands there as the chicken flaps its wings while it dies and like blood splatters. So that was like the first work she ever did that incorporated blood and had her body, because the blood from the chicken was going on her body. And I think after that, she realized the power of blood. I mean, it's like blood is very intriguing because, first of all, it's shocking. You know, it's like anytime somebody's going to do something with blood, it's like, whoa, because, you know, there's so many different meanings behind what is blood, and it's specific to each person, but it's also universal. There's so many different meanings that are, you know, that relate with it, as far as like, you can go spiritual, power. I mean, for her, it had to do with power. Like, it's, you know, going back to that almost like primitive idea with it. and also just like shock factor. I mean, Anna in her early work, she really liked the idea of like being shocking and like getting a reaction out of people. So Sweating Blood is really what it is, sweating blood. I mean, a lot of her film titles are very descriptive because she couldn't be bothered with coming up with titles because it was like, get the work, you know, make the work, get the work out, move on to the next work. It wasn't like, what should I title this? That came later. She started exploring titles, but really it was usually untitled or it was a descriptive title. So Sweating Blood is what it is. The idea is I'm gonna make blood, I'm gonna sweat blood, you know? So, you know, the idea was that the camera would stop and start while the blood, you know, so that the blood could drip down, which is very different from Blood and Feathers, where she actually takes blood, pours it on her body, and then rolls in the feathers, which I believe were turkey feathers. They were turkey feathers. I think she tried some other type of feathers and then they didn't work, and then she had to try different types of feathers. She was really obsessed with feathers for a while there. And I think it was like this idea of, isn't it the Icarus? Like yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Like too close to the sun.
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of like, a lot of those works are kind of exploring that idea, but also again, like the Blood and Feathers is also kind of going back to that chicken movie piece that I was talking about, because it's the idea when she talked about the chicken movie, she was saying how it was kind of referring to her, like basically being Cuban, and the idea of like how white chickens are sacrificed in Santeria, and like the idea of the power of the chicken going into her. Like, so in a way, like Blood and Feathers, like she's becoming the bird, you know? So it's kind of like a inside outside, which she also did a film called Inside Outside, Blood Inside Outside. So all the films kind of weave thematically. Like if you look at them, you can kind of see, oh, this idea goes here, and which is normal. Like for an artist, you have an idea and you do something, and then another idea, and then you kind of go back. And, you know, I think of it as like a stitch and sewing, that her themes are always kind of going backwards, forward, backwards, forward. So like the feathers, you'll see a lot of that in the film specifically. And it's, I mean, as far as like this idea of like props, I think it's when she's doing performative works. I mean, if you're using your body, you need something that you're doing your body with, right? Like something to react to, or especially if you're dealing with process. So before she really started using nature, like as her collaborator, it was like she was using these other materials like blood. Like to her, blood was a material. You know, and that's, as the work progresses, she wasn't using blood because blood was annoying. It's like it coagulated and it was too dark and it didn't look like blood. It was brown, and she wanted it to be shocking, and, you know, so it turned into paint, to tempera, you know, so that it could actually be more blood-like. So it's theatrical, right? So they're all like, they are kind of like props, but it's like she's looking for something to collaborate with to express these ideas. So the feathers, again, it's like another idea of like something that's flying, something that takes flight. Can she become the bird? What are the different ways that I can become a bird? I mean, with Mirage is like a very interesting film for me, because it just feels so, it's like it fits in, but yet it doesn't. Because I'm always with like, what's with the pregnant, like, I don't know, like, so she made two of those.
A prosthetic pregnant belly that she then,
and she did it
because it's a complicated, when you have to watch it a lot to kind of understand what's going on. Can you kind of narrate it, what the setup for us?
So basically, you know, we see her through the mirror. So we're seeing her reflection from a mirror, and she sits there looking very beautiful, and then suddenly starts stabbing her stomach with the knife, like really kind of violently, and then rips her stomach open and pulls out all these feathers, but very beautifully pulling them out, like she's freeing this bird, you know, or these, whatever the heck these feathers are representing, you know. I mean, I don't know.
And you see her, and then there's that moment where you just see like the camera is positioned and filming the mirror.
Right.
But then you see her.
Right.
You see the.
But you see her, but I mean, the thing is with Super 8, you have to remember is that Super 8, especially depending on the kind of camera you use, you might not see, when you're looking through the viewfinder, when you set it up, it might not be what you're actually going to get. So it depends on the Super 8 camera, because she could have set it up on the tripod and framed it so that you only saw the mirror, but because you weren't actually seeing the full frame, she could have had a little bit. I mean, I kind of feel like she probably didn't mean for her to be in it. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't know, but I think that she probably meant that it was just going to be the mirror, but because of the camera and the way that it, you know, because there's two different types of Super 8 cameras, just like 16mm, you know. Well, I guess now everything is one way, but back then it was like, you know, some of them, like in film school, it was like, I don't want the one where you don't see, where you can't see what you're going to get. Like, I want the one that's what I'm going to get, you know, like.
I was listening to a talk you gave, and someone asked about the blood, and just because we were talking about Iowa, you said, well, she was in Iowa, so she was in close proximity to slaughterhouses.
Right.
So
it is a normal thing. It's not like some weird, like nowadays, these kind of things, people wouldn't be so quick to think about, oh, I'm gonna get some blood. But like in Iowa, it's like, oh yeah, that's no problem.
Right. And then there's something, just to go back to what film can do. I mean, with feathers, even like the kind of beauty of seeing them in flight is something that film captures, or blood dripping down or being poured is something film captures. And so in some ways, some of these materials seem best suited for a moving image.
Well, they're very theatrical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she did a piece too that was with feathers in a balloon.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like this balloon is up in the sky, and then it gets shot, and then all the feathers float beautifully down to the ground. You know, that's again that idea of like feathers captured in, like, instead of the womb, they're in a balloon in the air, and then they kind of float down. So I'm not sure what the meaning was, but they're probably both related in that way, as far as a release of, you know, the feathers coming out, being trapped in something, whether it's a womb or, you know, maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I love when curators like, this means this, and you know, so she probably didn't think that, but yeah, that sounds great.
Well, she does. I mean, Marina and I are she in Blood and Feathers, she poses like a bird at the end.
Yes,
she does.
Becomes the bird, right? She becomes the bird, and she talked about that with the chicken movie. That the idea was, you know, that she, I mean, she basically said how it really freaked her out to have like holding a dead, you know, dying chicken. It wasn't like, oh yay, I'm going to be holding a dying chicken. It was actually like freaking her out, but it was the performance, and she holds it together. I mean, that's something that I love watching her when she's doing these actions, because she's just so Ana Mendieta, the artist.
Yeah, well, that actually kind of leads into our next question, which kind of goes back to the biography question as well. So you've spoken a lot about Ana's personality, and you've actually talked about her a lot as a very funny person. And it's not necessarily something that we see in the films.
And so gregarious, and of course, silent.
I mean, and the films have this kind of intensity, but you would never describe them as funny. So I just wonder, like, do you see a kind of duality there, or what parts of her personality come out for you in the films and what parts don't? Maybe? Yeah,
that's why. And I never thought about this either until one day I was chatting with somebody about her films, and I realized, you know, it's actually very brave of her to do some of these things. You know, I mean, really, like, to be nude and like pouring blood on yourself and diving into feathers and like performing, because really she was performing. Like, she was Ana Mendieta, the artist. Like, she had to create a persona and able to do this, because Ana was very talkative, like nonstop talking and moving all the time. Like, you know, when she talked, she's moving her hands, and she was constantly fidgeting and, you know, tapping her foot. And so to watch these films, you would never know that about her. She seems so poised and so like meditative, and just like almost like gliding. Like when she walks, it's almost like she's gliding like a dancer. So she really became this persona to do these works. I mean, I don't really, there's like little moments where I see her characters, and some of them funnily are not when she's in the film. Like there's one Silueta de Arena. It's a silhouette in the sand, and there's just water trickling like over the silhouette. And suddenly there's just like a little splash in the water. And I was like, oh, that's Anna. She probably threw a rock in there trying to get some ripples going, you know? It made me laugh. Like I could see her behind the camera, like the way she was thinking of like, this is just, nothing's happening here. I need to get something happening. I'm gonna throw a rock in there and get it to, you know,
I love that detail.
things like that, you know, because in the films, it's like, she's so the artist, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we have one more question for you, Raquel, and then we'll turn to our audience questions. But Seisha mentioned you've been working on a forthcoming feature-length documentary about your aunt's life and work. And so I'd love to just hear about that process and what you hope the documentary will do to kind of further expand our understanding of her life and work.
The documentary that never ends. Yes, I've been working on this film for a very long time now. It's kind of like another child of mine that I'm raising, and I'm wondering if it's ever going to move out of the house. It's just, you know, documentaries, it's actually like the first documentary I've made. I mean, since I started that, I've actually done other documentaries that I finished. They were short projects. I love the genre, but it's just like, this is such a huge project because, I mean, first of all, Anna knew so many people. So just to begin that process, it was like, I want to talk to everybody, you know? And so I just started, you know, we talked to this person, and like I had lists upon lists upon lists. And then every time I'd go to meet someone, oh, you need to talk to this person. And oh, okay, great. You know, so just like collecting information, you know, which was amazing. Like each person that I spoke to, I learned more and more about her character, about her life, about her work. I mean, really exciting stuff when we went to Italy and learned about her studio and how her process of working in the studio. Working with an assistant for the first time. I mean, just things that we didn't even know about. So that was all really, and it was amazing. You know, it was like a really great experience. But yeah, it's just like really hard to wrap it up because it's like there's still so much information out there that we haven't gotten, and it's like I just want to make sure that when it all comes together, that it's going to be like the definitive story of who she was, what her work was about. That's the challenge, right? So it's like, that's what we're working on right now, is hoping to get it done. We were going to finish it this past year, but then because of the pandemic, we couldn't even shoot anymore. We couldn't do anything. So like we basically did hardly anything that whole time, just like kind of organizing and all that. And then once things started opening up, it was like catching those final little interviews that we needed to get while editing was starting. So you know, it's just like a long process with documentary, especially it's like no funding and you're trying to get more money and you have to get people to help you for free and nobody likes that, you know. And so it's one of those kind of projects, a passion project. But I really like, my goal is really to be able to share who she was so that audiences can really learn about who she was, not just her work, like to really understand her work, like the many meanings behind her work, but also who she was as a person. Like who, you know, where she came from, what that meant to her, how that translated into her work, everything. Like I'm trying to pack it all in. So
can't wait to see it.
Our previous Viewfinder program featured Howardina Pindell, and we screened her work. And I mentioned this is this beautiful sequence because Howardina and Anna were close colleagues and friends and part of AI Art Gallery. And Howardina said that Anna always had a plate of rice and beans for her whenever she came over. And that you could yeah, so very hospitable.
Yeah, well, she had a lot of friends. I mean, she really, and she kept up with them too. She wasn't the kind who, you know, burned through friends or anything. She held on to them. And she would send postcards, letters, on the phone for hours. I mean, I don't even know how she did so much work because she was she was constantly like talking to people, writing letters, talking on the phone. traveling. It's like, and then doing all this work
and she curated shows. I mean, she was,
yeah, she had a lot of energy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. One is, could Raquel speak to her experience of being a family member responsible for an artist's films in the estate? What are the unique considerations and concerns in caring for an artist's film legacy as their family member?
Well, I guess, I mean, the main goal for me is always trying to stay true to Anna's intentions. So everything that comes at us, we always look at it and say, is this good for Anna? And then the next question is, what would she do? What would she have done? Like, we look at her, we're always going back to the archives. We're always reading what she wrote, and just trying to make sure that we're staying true to her intentions and like how, and really at the end of the day, it's about, she wants people to know her work. So it's like, as long as we're staying true to that mission and we're doing it in the way that's respectful of what she would have wanted to do, then that's basically my job.
Yeah.
Making sure that happens.
All right, this is a much more abstract question from Rose and Lally. She says, beautiful, thank you, wonderful films. Could you respond to the relationship between nature and the human condition in her work? And then also, she's curious whether there's an influence of Samuel Beckett in the films, and particularly in Sweating Blood. So do you have thoughts on either of those?
I don't know about that. I'd have to look. That name doesn't ring a bell coming up for anything of hers, but I mean, who knows? She was reading all the time, and she wasn't the kind of artist who just lived in a bubble and created work in a bubble. She was very well read. She was very aware of what was happening in the art world, would read all the art magazines, talking to different artists. So she was, making sure that what she was doing was relating to like the bigger picture and globally even,
Right.
It wasn't just like central to like Iowa City or whatever. It was thinking outside, responding, like having conversations with other artists kind of through the work. So it's possible, I mean, as far as nature, what was it like her work?
The relationship between nature and the human condition.
I mean, I feel like that's what her work is about. I mean, really, like that is one of her big themes. I mean, that is what led me to create a very short documentary that's 8 minutes called Nature Inside, on Mendieta Nature Inside. That's about her work from like looking at it from the point of view of the theme of nature, because her work really speaks to that. And she was concerned about that. She was concerned about the planet. And she talked about that, about, what's happening with the planet, and with, she was very much an environmentalist and very much concerned with, what mark are we leaving here? And, she didn't want to be, her works weren't doing things to the earth that was going to damage it. Like the things she did, it was like it would be reabsorbed into nature. It wasn't like she was hurting it in any way. She was very aware of that.
This next question kind of relates to her kind of evolution as an artist. So performance live art has earned a level of acceptance within contemporary art now, but here we are looking back more than 40 years when this was really cutting edge and radical as a practice. What drew Anna to working this way, and who was she looking at as a young artist? And maybe, Raquel, you can talk about how she started off as a painter and why that wasn't satisfying her, and her kind of art education in Iowa.
Right. And she did start off as a painter. She has an undergraduate degree in painting, and she started out her graduate degree in painting. Actually, her graduate degree is in painting, because she has two. She has an MA and then an MFA. So the first one, the master's, was in painting, even though her thesis was a performative piece, because she had already moved into doing, performative pieces. She was done with painting when she realized that like what she called the magic was missing. It's like she was looking at kind of like this primitive art and art from different cultures and seeing that they had kind of like this raw energy coming out of them. And she was trying to get it in her paintings, but I mean, it's, it's flat and there wasn't anything coming out of it for her. And so when she discovered, performance and working with her body, it's when she felt it, and she's like, I'm onto something, so it really was a progression. And she was very inspired by what she was learning at the University of Iowa. She was in the intermediate department, and there was a lot of exciting things happening there. Hans Brader was bringing in artists from New York City, People were, coming in giving lectures, and they were always looking at work of what was happening, in New York. So you can kind of see those connections of the things she was doing, or like responding to things that were happening. But a lot of the stuff she was doing was ahead of what other people were doing, because nobody was doing stuff like that. So, but I mean, there's all these influences. Like for me, when I look at her work, I see it's very autobiographical. So there's a lot of things she's doing that are referring to things, personal things, the kind of memories that happened to her in Cuba, that you wouldn't know unless you knew her biography. So that goes back to that biography question. So some of those performative works are kind of like art, like artistic expressions of a memory, maybe you could say. So is that answering the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a question about process. Who was operating the camera, and was it herself? And there's a time when the camera zooms in, and I wonder how she managed that while being in the video. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk us through the process of making these films. I know you weren't there, but as you
I know about them. Yeah.
Yes, but I know you are quite you know them in depth. So it'd be great to just hear maybe like the kind of nuts and bolts about how these came to be.
Sure. So a lot of the early works, I mean, it was whoever was around, so there was times when it was Hans Brader, there was times when it was a fellow classmate. I believe the one that zooms in, that's Corazón de Roca con Sangre. Aw.
Hey, Rose.
Cute.
Sorry. Continue.
So that film, I believe it was a friend of hers who was there, who helped her with that one. And that's why it has the zoom in. So I'm sure that Anna taught her, like, here's how you turn it on, here's how you zoom it in. I think that friend of hers, though, was also an artist, but I'm not sure what kind of art she did. I think it was more sculptural, but I'm sure, she taught her, here's how you use the Super 8 camera. It's pretty easy to use. I mean, they were made for like consumers, are made for like families to be able to just like pick it up and go and shoot movies. So it was really, a lot of those are done by whoever she could get to shoot whatever she was doing. If it's locked down on a tripod, she was doing it herself. So she would just lock it down in the tripod, and later you can really see when it's just her, because she picks it up off of the tripod and she starts moving it around, like when it becomes the works in nature, and she's like really like walking around it and then zooming in and out. Like she was really playing with all the different features of the camera. So you can really see that progression, almost like a filmmaker, like kind of taking it off of the sticks and like making it mobile, making it move. It's like as the pieces became more static, she created the movement by moving the camera, which is interesting. So you can see that progression as you watch the films through time.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll ask one last question and then wind it up. So there's a question about ecofeminism, but I'm going to expand it to feminism in general. So was feminism or ecofeminism influential to her work? And are there any specific artists or writers who you can think of who influenced her?
Well, Anna didn't, she was a feminist. Like, obviously she was a feminist, but she didn't consider herself a feminist. Like if you would have asked her, are you a feminist? She would have, who knows what she would have said. I mean, one day she could have said, yes, I'm a feminist. And the next day she would have said, no, I'm not a feminist. Because that's how she was, She was, depending on her mood or whatever was happening, she was going to respond. But really her concern with feminism was really about, at that time, it was, really like, she said it was a white women's movement. It was like all the women who were in, AIR and Hirshhorn, they were all, white women. Most of them, a lot of them were married. Some of them had kids. And she didn't feel like she belonged in that group. Like the more that she was kind of in that group, she kind of felt like, maybe this isn't me. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not really like these people. Like, I have darker skin. I'm from Cuba. I speak Spanish. I talk with my hands. I have different concerns than, I have different, people treat me differently even, they look at me differently than they look at some of these other women. So for her, it's because of the time, being in the 70s and the early 80s. She was questioning that, as a lot of women, were at that time as well. Like, how do I fit into this? I mean, feminism was very separated back then. I mean, more so than it is now, because it's like you had, different categories of feminists. So because of that, she wasn't like waving a flag like I'm a feminist. So I don't really think that she wanted anything to do with that with her work. Not because of that, but just because she really wanted her work to be seen for what it was, like thematically. She wanted it to speak to more universal themes. She wanted it to be broader. She wanted it to be timeless. She wanted anybody to be able to look at it, a man, a woman, any person, like any human, really, to look at it and to have a thought, to have a reaction, to have an emotion for it. And so because of that, it's kind of like, and I think because of that, she was ahead of her time, because it's like, it's kind of like now, like, she's like, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm me, like I'm not a feminist, I'm not a non-feminist, I'm me, like I'm an artist, so it's like, this is my work. It was all about the work, it's not about labeling it. So it really goes to that. It's like she was very, I mean, she thought about that kind of stuff,
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Raquel. This has been a wonderful conversation and I learned so much. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. It was fun.
It was so beautiful to watch these films all together, and we can't thank you enough for restoring them and being with us here tonight. So everyone, I hope you have a great evening. Sorry if we didn't have time to get to your questions. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for sticking with us through the whole year of Viewfinder. It's been great.
Yes.
All right. Thanks again, Raquel.
Bye. Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Bye-bye.